Sergeant Daniel Reyes drove his Humvee along the rough, dusty road under a pale morning sky. The heat had not yet risen, but the desert sun was already bright enough to make him squint. He was on a routine patrol with his squad, watching the horizon for any sign of danger. The soldiers chatted quietly over the radio, sharing stories about home. Some spoke of small children, others of favorite meals waiting for them in Texas. Daniel thought of his wife and baby daughter back home. His heart warmed at the thought, even as he scanned the roadside for threats. Suddenly, a small motion on the shoulder of the road caught his eye. At first it looked like a tumbleweed, but as he looked closer, he saw a tiny figure hunched beside the asphalt. The young child sat alone, small suitcase at her side, tears tracing dark lines on dusty cheeks. Her dress, once bright, was now dull and worn at the edges. Daniel felt a sudden jolt in his chest. He ordered his driver to stop and guided his squad to form a safe perimeter. Every soldier knew the drill: move carefully, stay alert, but also be ready to act with compassion. Daniel stepped out of the Humvee, the gravel crunching under his boots. His rifle was ready, but lowered. He did not want to frighten the child further. As he approached, he spoke in gentle tones, using the few Arabic words he had learned. Salam. Little one, are you all right? The girl looked up, startled, clutching her suitcase tightly. Her big eyes were red and swollen. She shivered, though the air was not cold. Daniel knelt down on one knee to seem less frightening. He held out a bottle of water. Water, he said in broken Arabic. Shwa, mime, please. She hesitated for a moment, then reached out her small hand. He unscrewed the cap and offered her a sip. Her lips trembled as she drank, and Daniel saw how thirsty she truly was. Behind him, one of his men, Private Harris, carried a first aid kit. He knelt beside Daniel and offered clean wipes. Gently, they wiped the girl's face. She let them work in silence, as though she was too tired to speak. Daniel noticed a tag on her dress, sewn in dusty white thread. He read a word he recognized: Aisha. He smiled softly. Your name is Aisha. She nodded, eyes wide. He tried another phrase. Family. She shook her head and whispered something in Arabic that he did not understand. No family? He asked gently. One tear slipped down her cheek. She nodded again and buried her face in her arms. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He had known fear and loss in his life, but this was different. This child was helpless, alone, and far from home. His promise to protect his own daughter rushed into his mind. He touched Aisha's shoulder.
I will help you, he said, his voice steady but kind. You are safe with us. I looked up at him, hope flickering in her eyes for the first
time. Daniel reached for his radio and called the forward base. This is Alpha Team. We have a civilian child in need of aid at Grid 4-2. She appears uninjured but alone and frightened. His voice carried calm confidence. A medic team would arrive soon. For now, Daniel stayed with Aisha. He glanced at her suitcase. It was scuffed, its handle frayed. Asked her, What do you have in your bag? She looked puzzled but then shrugged. He unzipped it carefully. Inside were a few simple things: a small doll missing an eye, a torn blanket, some drawings on tattered paper, and a faded photograph. The picture showed a smiling woman hugging a younger child. Aisha pointed to the woman. Daniel picked up the photo, studied it. He guessed it was her mother. He showed it to her. Who is this? The little girl's finger tapped the photo gently. Tears filled her eyes again. Daniel realized that this photo might be the only link she had to her family. He held the image with great care and promised himself to do everything he could to find her loved ones. Within minutes, the medic team arrived. Corporal Jenkins and Private Lee set up a small shelter to shield Aisha from the sun. They wrapped her in a clean blanket, checked her pulse, and examined her for cuts or bruises. Aisha sat quietly, clutching her suitcase. She let the medics work without protest. Daniel watched as Jenkins spoke softly to her, showing her he meant no harm. Once the medic finished, Daniel checked his watch. It was nearly noon. He decided to stay by Aisha's side until they could move her safely to the base. He asked her if she was hungry. She nodded, tiny stomach rumbling. Daniel reached into his pack and pulled out a sandwich. He offered half to her. At first, she hesitated, but then she took a small bite. Her eyes lit up. He smiled and ate a bit himself. It was simple food, but in that moment it felt like a feast. For her, after a few bites, she relaxed enough to rest her head on his knee. Daniel patted her back gently. While they waited for transport, Daniel thought back to earlier that morning. He had awoken before sunrise, said a quick prayer for another safe day, and started the patrol. He never imagined his day would take this turn. He looked down at Aisha's small hand curled around his finger. He felt his own fears and exhaustion fade away. In her innocence, he saw hope. He knew that helping her would change him more than. He changed her life. Soon the transport Humvee arrived. Aisha climbed in with the medics, clutching her suitcase and the photograph. Daniel made sure she was secure, then stood guard as the vehicle drove off toward Forward Operating Base Phoenix. As the dust settled behind her, Daniel watched until he could no longer see the small flicker of her form. He felt a quiet ache in his chest. This mission was not over. He needed to find out more about her story. Back in his own Humvee, Daniel called his commanding officer. "Sir, we have a child at the base who needs care and family contact. Her name is Aisha. She has no ID, but carries a photo of a woman who may be her mother. I will stay on station until we know more." The officer agreed. Daniel iced his weary shoulders as he prepared for the ride back. Even in the short drive, he kept thinking of Aisha's wide eyes and fragile hope. At the edge of the base, Daniel saw dust rising where another convoy waited. The base appeared calm, but buzzing with activity. Soldiers walked about in uniform. Some carrying supplies, others checking maps. Daniel made his way to the small clinic where Aisha was being cared for. He entered quietly. The medic nodded at him and pointed to a cot where Aisha slept, the blanket tucked around her. On a small table beside her lay the photograph and an empty water bottle. Daniel approached quietly and knelt beside her. He gently laid his hand on her blanket and whispered, "I will find your family, Aisha." He stood and left the room to speak with the base chaplain. Father Ahmed listened as Daniel told him about the child, the photograph, and the suitcase. The chaplain suggested reaching out to local authorities and community leaders. Daniel agreed and promised to post Aisha's photo on the base bulletin board. He found a blank space near the entrance, taped the picture there, and wrote in both English and Arabic, "Child found at grid 42. Please help identify and reunite. Bring any information to Sergeant Reyes." As Daniel stepped back, soldiers strolling by paused to look at the photo. Some took notes, others snapped quick pictures on their phones. Word would spread fast. Daniel felt a surge of relief. In a chaotic place, this simple act could mean everything to Aisha's future. He made his way to the mess tent for a quick meal, then settled at a small desk to write a report. Each word he typed was careful, precise, full of hope that someone out there was looking for Aisha. Late that night, Daniel lay on his cot under a thin blanket. The sounds of the base distant chatter, the hum of generators, the occasional bark of a guard's voice lulled him into a restless sleep. In his dreams, he saw Aisha's face glowing in the sun, holding out her little suitcase as if it were a treasure chest. He dreamed of her laughter, clean and bright, echoing down the dusty road. He woke before dawn, heart beating fast. Today, he thought, the search continues. As morning light seeped into his sleeping area, Daniel rose and prepared for another day on the base. He checked the bulletin board first. Under Aisha's photo, new notes were appearing. Names, descriptions of missing families, rumors of a refugee. Camp not far away. Daniel felt renewed energy. He tucked his shirt neatly, secured his gear, and headed toward the connections that might bring Aisha home. In that moment, he understood that discovery was only the first step. The real journey was just beginning, and he was ready to guide Aisha toward the family she had lost and toward the safety he promised to give. Daniel arrived early at Forward Operating Base Phoenix. his boots echoing on the metal walkway as he headed to the small medical tent where Aisha was being cared for. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, making the desert air warm and still. Inside the tent, the lights were soft, and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic. Corporal Jenkins stood beside Aisha's cot, gently wrapping her in a clean, light blanket. Private Lee checked her vital signs, speaking quietly so as not to frighten her. Aisha lay with her eyes half closed, clutching the small, battered suitcase to her chest. Daniel knelt beside her and touched her hand softly. She opened her eyes and offered him a small, tired smile. He smiled back, his heart warming at the sight. "Good morning," he said in simple English. Seeing that she did not understand fully, he added, "Sabah al-Khair," the Arabic for good morning. Her lips curved up a bit more, and she nodded, as if comforted by the familiar greeting. Jenkins finished his checks and stood up. "Her pulse is steady," he told Daniel. "She's dehydrated, but otherwise okay." Lee set aside the stethoscope and rested his hand on Aisha's shoulder. "We should keep her here until we know more," he said. Daniel agreed, looked at Aisha's suitcase, imagining what stories it held inside. The drawings and that single photograph were like pieces of a puzzle. He was determined to complete it. Daniel turned to Jenkins and Lee. "Thank you. I'll stay with her today. I want to help calm her fears." Jenkins nodded. "I'll get you some water and juice," he said as he left the tent. Lee remained by Aisha's side, offering her small sips of water and wiping her brow. Daniel watched the gentle care his men showed, proud of how they acted like family members to this child who had none. In a quiet corner of the tent, Daniel pulled out the photograph he had rescued from Aisha's suitcase. It showed a smiling woman, her mother. Daniel guessed holding a younger Aisha, wrapped in a bright shawl. The image spoke of warmth and love, and Daniel felt a knot form in his throat. We folded the photograph carefully and placed it on a small table beside Aisha's cat, where she could see it even when she slept. He hoped that seeing her mother's face would bring some comfort to her. Later that morning, Father Ahmed, the base chaplain, entered the tent. He carried a small book and wore his gentle, caring smile. He had heard of Aisha's arrival and wanted to offer spiritual support. Daniel introduced them. "Father Ahmed, this is Aisha. She needs our help." The chaplain knelt beside Aisha and spoke softly in Arabic. He told her that she was safe and that they were trying their best to find her family. Aisha's eyes brightened when she heard a few familiar words. She reached out and touched his hand. Father Ahmed placed his hand over hers and blessed her quietly. Then he looked at Daniel. "We should pray for guidance," he said. Daniel nodded. He was not a man of strong faith, but he respected the chaplain's kindness. They bowed their heads, and Father Ahmed quietly spoke words of comfort, asking for strength and for Aisha's safe reunion with her loved ones. When the prayer ended, Aisha smiled and clapped softly, unaware of the full depth of the words, but soothed by the rhythm of the chaplain's voice. After the prayer, Father Ahmed suggested posting Aisha's photograph around the base and in nearby villages. Daniel agreed. He asked privately to print copies of the photo and the engraving he had seen on the back of Aisha's mother's watch, the only other clue to her identity. Lee set to work, and soon they had a stack of photocopies ready. Daniel and Father Ahmed left the tent and walked to the base notice board. Soldiers paused to look as Daniel pinned up the first copy, along with a note written in both English and Arabic. "Lost child named Aisha, found on road. Please help reunite her with her family. Bring any information to Sergeant Reyes." As they returned to the tent, Aisha watched them curiously. Daniel knelt once more beside her and pointed to the notice board in the distance. He said, "Your picture is up, Aisha. People will see you and help find your family." She studied his face, her eyes wide, then looked toward where he pointed. She seemed to understand that something important was happening. She hugged her suitcase tighter and gave Daniel a hopeful smile. The afternoon sun climbed higher, and the base grew busier. Supplies arrived, vehicles came and went, and soldiers moved about on errands. Brought in the medical tent, time seemed to slow. Daniel settled into a folding chair beside Aisha's cot, determined to stay as long as he could. He pulled out his own notebook and began writing a report about her situation. planning to give it to the commanding officer later. Every few minutes, he looked up to check on Aisha, offering her sips of juice that Private Jenkins brought, and making sure she remained comfortable. Around mid-afternoon, word came that the local police station had received a call. A man at a nearby village had recognized the woman in the photograph as the wife of a family displaced from Mosul. The soldier at the station had called to say they would send a patrol to check refugee records. Daniel felt a surge of relief. He hurried back to the tent to share the news with Aisha, though he knew she might not understand. He knelt beside her, spoke gently in Arabic, and made gestures that meant mother and home. Aisha's eyes lit up, and she clapped once, then leaned against Daniel as if trusting him completely. That evening, Daniel and Father Ahmed organized a small circle in the tent for stories and comfort. A group of soldiers gathered around, sitting on folding chairs or standing near the tent walls. They took turns telling Aisha simple tales. Jenkins spoke of a playful puppy that learned to dance. Lee told of a brave kite that flew above the clouds. And Father Ahmed shared a parable of kindness. Daniel was last. He spoke of a brave little bird that found its way home after a long journey. As he spoke, he reached out and held Aisha's hand. She listened, eyes shining, her tears forgotten for the moment. After the stories, Father Ahmed blessed Aisha again and gave her a small, soft toy rabbit from his own kit. The rabbit was white with pink ears and tiny black eyes. Aisha hugged the toy close and smiled a bright, shy smile that warmed everyone's hearts. Daniel felt a quiet joy at seeing her happy, even in this strange place. As night fell, the tent grew cooler. Aisha's eyelids drooped, and soon she was fast asleep, clutching her rabbit in the edge of her blanket. Daniel watched her for a moment, his heart full of both sadness and hope. He took his notebook and stepped outside to send an update to his commanding officer. The sky was a deep purple, and the stars twinkled overhead. The base lights glowed softly in the distance. Daniel typed his message. Aisha remains stable and calm. Local authorities are investigating the identity leads. They're providing her shelter, food, and comfort. We'll keep you informed. He sent the update and slipped the notebook into his pack. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also a sense of purpose. He returned to the tent and knelt by Aisha's cat once more. He gently brushed her hair from her forehead. Tomorrow, he whispered softly in Arabic, we will find your mother. Though she slept, she stirred slightly and gave a small smile. Daniel softly closed her blanket a bit more, then stepped back to let her rest. Outside the tent, the night watch took over. Daniel found a spot on a folding cot beneath a small fan and lay down. He stared up at the canvas ceiling, thinking of the day's events, the sudden discovery at dawn. The journey to the base, the gentle care of his men, and the first glimmers of hope. He thought of his own daughter, asleep in her crib. Thousands of miles away, he closed his eyes, imagining their reunion. Then he thought of Aisha's mother, wherever she might be, praying for her safe return. Daniel drifted into a deep sleep, determined that tomorrow would bring them one step closer to the family Aisha had lost, and one step closer to healing the wounds of war with simple acts of kindness. ChatGPT said. Daniel woke before sunrise, the soft glow of dawn slipping through the flap of the medical tent. He had slept only a few hours, but his mind raced with one thought, finding Aisha's family. He dressed quietly, checked his gear, and slipped back into the tent. Aisha lay on her cot, clutching her small toy rabbit. Her face was peaceful in sleep, but Daniel knew her dreams might be troubled. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Good morning, Aisha." In Arabic, she opened her eyes slowly, blinked at him, then offered a small smile. Outside the tent, the base was already stirring. Soldiers headed to the mess hall, vehicles rumbled to life, and the hum of generators filled the air. Daniel carried Aisha's photograph and the list of engraving details from her mother's watch to the communications office. A radio operator, Specialist Ortiz, helped him send a message to nearby checkpoints and to the provincial headquarters of the Iraqi police. The message described Aisha, the photograph of her mother, and the watch engraving. Daniel watched as Ortiz confirmed the transmission, hoping the call would reach someone who knew this child's story. While they waited for any reply, Daniel decided to widen the search within the base itself. He gathered a small team, Private Lee, Corporal Jenkins, and Father Ahmed. They walked together to the entrance gate, where local workers and a few Iraqi officers moved in and out. Daniel pinned another copy of Aisha's photo and information. On the public bulletin board, he spoke to each person who passed by, explaining in simple words and gestures, Aisha, little girl, lost mother. What? Some nodded and offered prayers, others shook their heads in sympathy. As they worked, a long-time interpreter, Mahmoud, arrived. He had connections with families who had fled the fighting. Mahmoud examined the photograph carefully. I know that woman, he said softly. She is from a town near Mosul called Tal Afar. Her name is Layla Hassan. Daniel's heart leaped. Can you help us reach people there? He asked. Mahmoud nodded. Explained that many families from Tal Afar had taken refuge in camps near Erbil and in surrounding villages. He offered to go himself to speak with local elders, hoping someone would recognize the watch engraving. The team thanked Mahmoud, and he left quickly, carrying a stack of photocopies. Daniel watched him go, dust rising around his boots. He felt hope growing. This could bring us to her family, he told Father Ahmed. The chaplain placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. Inshallah, he said, God willing. Back in the med tent, Daniel took a moment to soothe Aisha. He spoke softly in Arabic. Mahmoud will look for your mother today. Aisha's eyes grew bright with hope. She hugged her rabbit and nodded vigorously. Daniel smiled, remembering how fragile she had seemed when he first found her. Now she seemed more at ease, trusting these soldiers who cared for her so much. By midday, word of Aisha's story had spread beyond the base. A photojournalist embedded with the troops for a news outlet arrived, asking if he could interview Daniel. With permission from the chain of command, Daniel agreed. They sat under a shaded awning outside the tent. The journalist spoke quietly, asking questions in English. Daniel told the brief story, how he had found Aisha on the roadside, how she carried only a suitcase and a photograph, and how the unit had banded together to care for her. He spoke of the photograph of her mother and the hope it gave them. The journalist snapped pictures of the printed photo on the tent wall of Aisha's cat with her toy rabbit and of Daniel gently brushing Aisha's hair. He asked Aisha her name, and Aisha whispered, Aisha, and held up 3 fingers. The journalist smiled and promised to share her story with the world, hoping someone would see and recognize her. Daniel felt a surge of relief. The wider the reach of the story, the better the chance of finding Layla Hassan. That afternoon, as dust devils swirled across the desert plain, Mahmoud returned. He carried his phone, which rang constantly with messages. He managed a small smile as he approached Daniel and the others. He had good news. An imam in Erbil had seen the photograph shared on social media. The imam recognized Layla Hassan as the woman who had helped care for his own sick mother before the war. He agreed to check records at the refugee camp near Erbil, where many families from Tal Afar had gathered. Daniel felt tears sting his eyes. He placed a hand over his heart. Thank you, he said deeply to Mahmoud. The interpreter confirmed that the camp authorities would search their registry for any family with that name and checking the watch engraving. Daniel sent another message to the base commander, asking that a convoy be ready to collect Layla Hassan if she was found. As evening approached, news arrived by radio. A patrol had reached the camp outskirts and was gathering information. Expected to find Layla Hassan at the registration center by dawn? Daniel spent the rest of the day preparing for Aisha's reunion. He and Jenkins cleaned and folded fresh clothes they had set aside for her. Lee packed snacks and water bottles to bring along the next morning. Father Ahmed said prayers for safe travels and for Layla's strength after losing her husband to a missile strike. Daniel thought of the emergency he had succumbed to. That morning, only a few short days ago, Aisha had been a frightened child alone in the road. Now she would soon see her mother again. That night, the base held a small vigil around the tent. Soldiers, staff, and medics gathered quietly. Some brought candles, others simply stood in silence. They placed small stones around the tent flap. a tradition from Father Ahmed's homeland to protect travelers and children. Daniel watched as Aisha fell asleep again, the soft glow of candlelight reflecting in her toy rabbit's black eyes. He stood beside her cot, the weight of his helmet in one hand, his rifle leaning against the tent pole. He thought of his own daughter, asleep in her crib back home, and of his wife, whom he had not seen in months. He thought of Layla Husno. Layla Hassanu had lost so much, yet still lived on to find her child. Daniel knelt beside Aisha, whispered a promise in Arabic. "Tomorrow, your mother will hold you." Aisha's tiny hand reached out and found Daniel's. She squeezed it once, then drifted into a dreamless sleep. Late into the night, Daniel sat with a steaming cup of tea in a quiet corner of the mess tent. He reviewed the plan for dawn. A convoy of 3 Humvees would depart with Aisha, escorted by 2 Iraqi police vehicles carrying the patrol and camp officials. They would travel 80 miles west to the refugee camp gate. Once they found Layla, they would bring her and Aisha back to the base, where medical staff would perform a final check before reuniting mother and daughter. Daniel wrote a final note in his notebook: coordinate with Iraqi police liaison, ensure all vehicles fueled and stocked. Confirm camp registration records show Hassan family. Prepare small welcome kit. New dress, water shoes, toiletries. He closed his notebook and sipped his tea, feeling hope and exhaustion mixed together like strong coffee.
He returned to his cot.
Cat in a quiet barracks, the distant glow of the base lights, like a small city in the desert. He lay down, settled under the thin blanket, and closed his eyes. Even with sleep beckoning, his mind replayed the morning when he first saw Aisha on the road, her tiny frame hunched beside that lonely suitcase. He thought of the journey they had traveled in just 3 days, from frightened child to cared-for guest, from a single, tentative sip of water to the promise of a joyful reunion. As he drifted off, Daniel thought one last time of Aisha's mother, waiting at the camp registration center, uncertain and anxious. He prayed that dawn would bring closure to a family torn apart by war. He dreamed of Aisha's laughter once more, bright and clear, echoing across the desert as she ran into her mother's arms. And he knew that tomorrow, in the soft morning light, a miracle born of compassion and duty would come to pass. Daniel rose before dawn, his thoughts heavy with hope and anxiety. He dressed in his uniform, careful to leave his rifle within arm's reach, and strode toward the convoy staging area. The sky above, forward operating base Phoenix, was pale gray. Only a hint of light at the horizon. Aisha slept soundly in her cot, clutching her small white rabbit toy. Daniel knelt beside her for a moment, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Rest now," he whispered softly in Arabic. "Soon you will see your mother." Outside, 3 Humvees stood ready, engines idling. Beside them were 2 Iraqi police vehicles, their lights off for a low-profile departure. Corporal Jenkins loaded a small welcome kit into the back of Daniel's Humvee, a clean dress folded neatly, a pair of water shoes, a toothbrush and paste, and a small box of dates. Privately brought a thermos of warm milk for Aisha's journey. Father Ahmed carried a small wooden rosary wrapped in cloth. As a gift for Layla, Daniel inspected each vehicle to ensure fuel tanks were full and spare tires were secure. Checked the map one more time, 80 miles west to the refugee camp near Erbil. As the convoy rolled out, the morning air was cool against Daniel's face. Dust swirled behind the vehicles, and soldiers sat alert, scanning the flat desert for any sign of trouble. Aisha rode in the middle Humvee, sitting on a sandbag mound so she could see outside. Jenkins sat beside her, offering warm milk in a small cup. She sipped it shyly, then rested her head against his shoulder. Daniel watched the convoy ahead and felt a tight knot of worry. He prayed silently that they would reach the camp safely, find Layla, and bring mother and daughter home. The road was long and straight, lined by low desert bushes and the occasional power line. Every 10 miles, a small checkpoint showed signs of life. A wooden shack, a handful of guards waving the convoy through. Each guard glanced at Aisha's photograph taped to the Humvee door and nodded in understanding. At the 4th checkpoint, an Iraqi officer hurried to the lead vehicle and spoke quickly in Arabic into a radio. Daniel caught the officer's words, It was clear, Hassan family waiting. Hope fluttered in Daniel's chest. Soon he thought, soon they would meet. At midday, they arrived at the camp entrance. A high-wire fence surrounded rows of white tents and simple shelters. Dust lay thick on the ground, and people moved slowly in the hot air. 2 camp officials stood by a metal gate, scanning IDs and registration papers. One official held a list of names. When he saw Layla Hassan, his face lit up. He waved the convoy through. Inside, a small crowd had gathered. Mothers with children stood in shaded areas. Fathers sat on crates in the sun, and elderly people rested on blankets. Families who had waited for news exchanged quiet conversations. Daniel parked near the gate. Jenkins lifted Aisha down from the Humvee, keeping a gentle hold on her hand. She wore the clean dress, its bright fabric contrasting with the dusty tan of the camp. She clutched the toy rabbit and the small box of dates. A hush fell over the camp as Daniel carried Aisha's suitcase toward the crowd. He held the photograph of Layla in one hand, showing it to the gathered families. A woman stepped forward, her face drawn with worry and relief. Wearing a faded headscarf, she clutched a torn bag to her chest. When she saw Aisha, her eyes filled. With tears, she whispered a name in Arabic, and Aisha's eyes widened. The little girl dropped her rabbit and ran the last few steps, her small legs moving fast in the flip-flops Jenkins had given her. Layla Hassan caught Aisha in her arms with a sob. Mother and daughter wrapped their arms around each other, rocking gently as though neither wanted to let go. Daniel stood a few feet away, his rifle held loosely. He watched the reunion, his chest tightening as he realized how deep the pain had been and how strong this moment was. Layla buried her face in Aisha's hair, her tears wet on the child's dress. Aisha pressed the worn photograph against her mother's chest, and Layla traced the faces in the picture, as though seeing them for the first time. Men and women. In the camp gathered around to watch, offering soft words and gentle smiles. Some wept quietly, moved by the reunion. The camp official approached Daniel and said softly, "Thank you, soldier. You have done great good today." Daniel nodded, fighting tears of his own. "It was the least I could do," he replied in broken Arabic. "This little girl is very brave." Layla stepped back and looked at Daniel for the first time. Sure. Eyes were red and swollen, but they shone with gratitude. She held up an old, engraved watch that she wore around her neck on a string. "This watch," she said in Arabic, "belongs to my mother. They took her in Mosul. She gave it to me when we fled." She pressed the watch into Daniel's palm. The engraving matched the one he had seen on the road. Daniel held the watch with reverence. He realized that his keen eye for detail had helped bring this moment about. As the sun moved westward, the camp officials prepared to return Layla and Aisha to Forward Operating Base Phoenix for a medical check and a night of rest. An official from the camp offered to accompany them in one of the police vehicles. Daniel arranged seating so that Layla and Aisha could sit together in the Humvee for comfort. He loaded the welcome kit into the back, making sure the dates and water shoes were easy to reach. Father Ahmed stood quietly by the gate, holding his rosary, ready to offer a prayer of safe travels. Before they left, Layla turned again to Daniel. She took both his hands, pressing something into his palm. Daniel looked down to see a small woven bracelet of prayer beads. "For you," Layla said softly, "so that God watches over you as you watched over my child." Daniel slipped the bracelet onto his wrist, felt its weight. A gentle reminder of this day and of the bond formed in a land of war. The convoy retraced its path under a hotter sky. Aisha and Layla sat together, whispering softly. Layla pointed to the toys and clothes, and Aisha giggled as she slipped on her new water shoes. Daniel rode up front beside the driver, watching the desert pass by. Each mile brought them closer to the base, to safety, and to tomorrow. At dusk, they rolled back into Forward Operating Base Phoenix. Soldiers lined the route, clapping and cheering as Layla and Aisha passed. Some had tears in their eyes. Daniel guided the Humvee to the medical tent where medics awaited. They checked Layla's vitals as well, giving her water and a simple meal. Aisha sat cross-legged on the cot, hugging her mother tightly. In a quiet corner of the tent, Daniel, Jenkins, Lee, and Father Ahmed gathered. They watched the mother and daughter talking, pointing to the photograph and the small rabbit toy. Layla leaned down and kissed Aisha gently on the forehead. Joy in Aisha's eyes was bright and full. She pointed to Daniel and said 2 words in English, "Thank you." That night, Daniel sat outside the tent with Layla and Aisha. The stars glimmered above in a clear desert sky. Layla spoke in broken English, "My daughter is safe, thanks to you." Daniel smiled and replied, "You both are safe now." He watched them share the dates from the welcome kit, their faces lit by a small lantern. The desert night was peaceful, a sharp contrast to the chaos that had brought them together. When it was time to sleep, Layla and Aisha were guided to a quiet, secure tent prepared for them. Their cots were side by side. A new dress hung neatly nearby, and Jenkins had left a plate of fresh fruit at their bedside. Father Ahmed blessed them once more. Daniel stood at the entrance and said softly, "Good night, sleep well." Aisha waved her small hand, and Layla smiled with gratitude. As the medical tent closed for the night, Daniel sat alone on a sandbag bench under a soft floodlight. He took off the prayer bead bracelet and held it in his hand. He thought of the long journey from that dusty road to this peaceful moment. He thought of the power of kindness and the way one small act can ripple outward, touching many lives. He slipped the bracelet back on his wrist, a promise to remember this day and to share its lesson. In the quiet darkness, Daniel whispered a prayer of thanks. He thought of the little girl who had walked alone with a suitcase, and of the mother, who had feared she was gone forever. He thought of his own daughter back home, and of the promise he would make tonight to hold her tight when he returned. Tomorrow he would file his reports, share the full story with headquarters, and continue his duties. But tonight he allowed himself to sit in the glow of a miracle, soldier's promise fulfilled, child reunited with her mother, and a simple act of compassion that would echo long after the war's guns were silent. ChatGPT said, months passed after the desert wind carried them back to Forward Operating Base Phoenix. The long days of searching, waiting, traveling had become distant memories for Sergeant Daniel Reyes. He returned to his usual duties with steady resolve, but every now and then his thoughts drifted to Aisha and her mother, Layla Hassan. He missed the small laughter that had brightened the dusty tent and the gentle thank you whispers from Aisha's lips. One clear afternoon in Texas, Daniel sat in his small living room. His uniform hung neatly on a chair beside the door, and on the wall above his couch hung a framed drawing. It showed a smiling child in a bright dress, kneeling beside a kneeling soldier on a sunlit road. Above them, a few palm trees and rippling sand dunes. He traced his finger over the child's face in the drawing, a Shah's face painted with simple strokes, but full of life. Underneath, in careful childlike letters, the words, "My hero." Daniel smiled and reached for the envelope that lay on his coffee table. The handwriting on the front was small and neat, for Sergeant Reyes, from Aisha. Inside, a single sheet of paper and a photograph lay waiting. He lifted the photo first. It showed a little girl, older now, standing in front of a school building. She wore a crisp white blouse and a blue skirt, her hair pulled back in 2 neat braids. A bright green chalkboard behind her read, "Welcome back, Aisha." She held a bouquet of red flowers and beamed at the camera. Daniel's heart swelled. Below the photograph, he unfolded the letter. The paper was creased where it had been folded into the envelope. In simple English, Aisha had written, "Dear Sergeant Reyes, thank you for finding me. Now I go to school and smile every day. I remember you every time I see my rabbit toy. I drew this picture for you. I hope you like it. One day I want to be a teacher and help children like me. Please come visit. Love, Aisha." Daniel felt tears fill his eyes as he read her words. He picked up the drawing and ran a finger along the bright lines. The picture was of a little girl in a blue school uniform, standing beside a soldier in green fatigues. The sun shone above, and both held hands. It was simple but perfect. He held it close to his chest and closed his eyes, breathing in deeply. This small piece of paper carried so much hope and promise. That evening, Daniel carefully placed the photograph and drawing on a small wooden shelf next to his daughter's toys. His own daughter, Emily, was now 5 years old. She ran into the room, her curly hair bouncing, and looked curiously at the new items. "What's that, Daddy?" she asked. Daniel knelt down and held both photos so she could see. "This is Aisha," he explained softly. "She was a brave little girl in Iraq. I helped her find her mother." Emily's eyes grew wide. "Can we send her a drawing back?" Daniel smiled. "That's a wonderful idea. Let's make her one together." He brought out colored pencils and paper. Together, they drew a picture of a little girl and her mother hugging, with a soldier standing nearby smiling. At the top, they wrote, "Friends across the world." Emily signed her name in bright pink letters. They mailed the drawing that night. Daniel imagined Aisha's delight when she received it. He felt a quiet joy knowing that the kindness they had shown each other had grown into a friendship spanning continents. A month later, Daniel received another letter. It contained a small booklet of photographs from Aisha's first year of school. One photo showed her reading aloud in class. Another showed her playing soccer with friends at recess. There was even a picture of her holding a cake at her 6th birthday party, surrounded by her classmates. Next to each photo, Aisha had written a short line, "Learning to read, making friends, fun birthday." At the end of the booklet, she wrote, "I will always remember you." Daniel shared these photos with his fellow soldiers at a reunion back at their old base camp. Though the camp was now a quiet place with most troops gone, a small group had stayed to keep order. Daniel held up the photos during a cookout. One by one, soldiers gathered around, smiling and patting his shoulder. Lieutenant Matthews, who had been the base commander, placed a hand on Daniel's back. "You did good work, Reyes," he said, voice thick with emotion. "You showed the best of us." Daniel nodded, eyes bright. He explained how simple acts, offering water, posting a photo, sharing stories, had led to this beautiful reunion and lasting friendship. That evening, they lit small lanterns around the mess tent in honor of Aisha and all the children affected by war. Daniel chose an empty spot next to his own cot and placed one lantern there. He said quietly for Aisha and her mother. The warm light flickered as dusk settled, and Daniel felt a deep peace. Back home, Daniel often imagined Aisha's laughter echoing in the desert wind. He pictured her standing proud in her school uniform, ready to become a teacher as she wrote. He imagined her helping other children who felt lost, just as he had helped her. The idea warmed his heart. One weekend, Daniel visited his daughter's school. He brought along the photo of Aisha at school and showed it to Emily's teacher. "Mrs. Carter, this is my friend Aisha," he said. "She lives far away now, but she and I write letters." Mrs. Carter smiled and asked if they could show the class. Daniel agreed. He stood in front of a group of curious first graders and told them about finding a little girl alone with her suitcase, about caring for her, posting her photo, and helping her find her mother. The children listened, wide-eyed. He ended his talk by saying, "Even small kindness can change someone's life." Afterward, the students drew pictures of kindness. Some showed sharing water, others helping elderly neighbors cross the street. At home that night, Emily climbed onto Daniel's lap with her favorite stuffed bear. "Daddy," she said, looking up at him, "I want to help children too, like Aisha." Daniel hugged her gently. "What? You already do, sweetheart. Every time you share your toys or comfort a friend, that kindness grows and grows." Emily yawned and nestled against him. Daniel tucked her into bed and kissed her forehead. As he turned off the light, his own thoughts drifted back to that dusty road in Iraq. Years rolled on. Daniel left the army and began working with a relief organization. Dedicated to reuniting families affected by conflict, he traveled to many places, but his first mission remained closest to his heart. He took Aisha's photograph with him everywhere he went, a reminder of why he chose this path. He visited refugee camps, helping rebuild shelters and teaching volunteers how to connect children with their families. Everywhere he went, he shared Aisha's story as an example of hope. Meanwhile, letters continued to arrive from Aisha. She wrote that she had become a student teacher in her village school. She thanked Daniel for inspiring her to help other children. She sent drawings of her classroom, her new friends, and the dusty road where she once stood, now empty, but no longer filled with fear. Daniel kept each letter in a special box on his desk, reading them whenever he needed encouragement. One spring morning, a new message arrived that made Daniel's heart leap. It was an invitation. "Please come to our school graduation," Aisha wrote. "You are invited as our guest of honor. We will celebrate together." Daniel read the words again and again, hardly believing them. The ceremony was 6 months away, but he immediately requested leave and began planning the journey. The day finally came. Daniel stepped off the small plane onto the sun-baked runway near Aisha's village. He carried a camera, gifts for the school, and a heart pounding with anticipation. A welcoming committee of parents, teachers, and children waited at the airstrip. At their front stood Layla, radiant in a bright dress, and beside her, Aisha. Now tall and confident in her graduation robe, Aisha ran forward and threw her arms around Daniel. He knelt and hugged her tightly, feeling a rush of pride and happiness. He looked up at her mother, who wiped tears from her eyes. Layla placed her hand on Daniel's cheek and said thank you in English, her voice soft but full of emotion. "Thank you for believing in us." At the graduation ceremony that afternoon, Daniel sat on a low stage with village elders. The children performed songs of peace and hope, and Aisha gave a speech in front of the entire crowd. In her clear, gentle voice, she told the story of how she was lost and found, how a soldier named Daniel showed her kindness, and how that kindness led her to teaching other children. The audience rose to their feet in applause. "Ow!" Daniel felt his eyes grow warm as he watched Aisha accept her diploma, her face glowing with accomplishment. Afterward, the villagers presented Daniel with a plaque. It read, "For courage, compassion, and the promise of a brighter future." He accepted it with humble thanks, knowing that the real honor belonged to the reunited family and to the strength of a little girl who dreamed of helping others. That night, Daniel sat by a lantern in the school courtyard. The walls were lined with children's drawings, including his own drawing of friends across the world. He placed his hand on the plaque and thought of all the steps that had led him here from that first dusty morning on the road to this clear evening under the stars. He realized that the world, though vast and often troubled, could be made kinder, one small choice at a time. As Daniel prepared to leave the next morning, Aisha and Layla walked him to the airstrip. Aisha pressed a small gift into his hand, a journal bound in blue leather, embossed with her name and the words "Stories of Hope." Inside were blank pages waiting for new stories. Aisha smiled.